The final episode of Incision is the shortest, simplest, and yet most confusing and cryptic of the lot. While the first two have 6 levels and 2 boss fights, this one only has 3 and 2 respectively. The throne and the matriarch are gone, and now all that remains is an all-destructive and all-consuming evil, turbocharged by the power of the Chariot of the Gods. The game takes a dark turn in the start and charts a completely unique course to the one so far. As usual, I wanted to quickly mention that Inni has left another comment on the previous video, giving a full transcript of the radio message, which I didn't provide, since I didn't quite catch all of it myself. Let's now get into the finale of the darkest boomer shooter yet, where everything falls apart. The cutscene starts in a haze yet again. Healer is alive, but barely conscious. He has been found by a sycophant and conservator. By the bone blade on the spear saw, they seem to recognize him. Something explodes in the background before the protagonist is taken to this diabolical machine. It carelessly slices them open and pulls out this otherworldly object, glistening with red energy. We are dragged and dropped into a furnace pit, still bleeding, and E3M1 begins, Thy Cherished Flesh. My new body shivers for the first time in 6 months. I know what they did to me, took from me, my power, the gift of the grafting throne which made me stronger than any of its spawn, was stolen. Emotions that I had nearly forgotten are coming back to me. I mustn't let them overwhelm me. They can't be allowed to harness such power. I'll follow its trail to the core of the growth and leave it a permanent mark of fear. Within the narrative of the game, the process of rebranding built this organ within Healer, which gave them the powers they had. While their physical form remains the same, they are now slowly becoming human again, with emotions and vulnerabilities to match. All that being said, nothing changes within the gameplay. The player still moves and fights in exactly the same way as before, which creates some ludonarrative dissonance, and makes it hard to ascertain exactly what has changed. By the way, the phrase, Thy Cherished Flesh, sounds like it's a line from somewhere, and I looked it up, but most of the results are related to Incision. So I guess if this is a reference to something, it must be a really obscure, but probably not. I guess it just reminded me of Thy Flesh Consumed episode from Doom, which is a line from the Bible. The level begins in said furnace pit. We must shoot and destroy these 2 glowy bits, which damages the contraption and gets us up. We see that we are in a growth-born structure again, similar to, if not the Rust organs. One of the screens reads, the growth's language is barely comprehensible. The word primagen is used many times in relation to my DNA. I looked up if the word primagen meant anything, and it doesn't seem to be an actual word beyond... Oh my god. Regardless of its real meaning, I think it's safe to say this information is very important to growth, and they have already harvested a great amount by analysis of the core extracted from Healer's body. To get out of this room, we must press 4 switches before being attacked by a response force of Rustborn, followed by a single sycophant, sparkling with orange energy, and getting fucking destroyed. Wait, that wasn't supposed to happen. There are only 2 new enemy types in this whole episode. Instead, the rest of the increase in stakes and difficulty comes from these new variants of existing kinds. Particular enemies will be imbued with the same orange energy we've been seeing everywhere, and have enhanced capabilities. They have higher health, tend to be faster, and have alternate attack methods. The sycophant fires 3 blades instead of just 1. The clinkers fire out these slow homing projectiles. I have 2 theories as to what they represent, and I go back and forth on which one I find more convincing. Let me first get a few things clear off the bat, because they help contextualize many events in this episode. There's 3 major changes between episodes 2 and 3. First of all, growth is now under the control of nothing and no one, serving only its own greed and glutton. Second of all, the power of the throne didn't just disappear when it was destroyed, but instead rained down, along with the filth, and is now being tamed by the Malnecris. Third of all, growth has recovered the core of Healer, not only a source of great strength, but also data and knowledge. It's been studying him all the way back, even in episode 1 after all. I say this because I believe the orange enemy variants could be the result of different things. My first hypothesis is that they are now simply harboring the throne's power, granted by a miracle in the sky. The other theory involves the Spearsaw Overcharge power-up. Remember how I was saying we'd come back to it later? Well, when I saw the empowered sycophant, my first thought was, oh damn, this looks so similar to that one power-up that we've been using, but seemed useless for growth itself. Especially given that we've just been captured and essentially interrogated. I felt like the forces of evil have finally understood how to harness some of Healer's capabilities and turn them against him. I feel like this cutscene, text prelude and start of the level are designed in a way to draw this connection in your head, and also I find it a bit more narratively satisfying. The first sections of the level don't really hold anything we haven't seen before in similar levels, except for the fact that the facility is not in good shape. There is debris and fire scattered in places, and everything shakes and rumbles at a few points in the level, as if airstrikes or artillery were being used up above. In this shipping area quite reminiscent of the start of E1M5, we are faced by one of the two new enemy types of the episode, a behemoth. An absolute titan of military armaments, bulletproof plating, and a structure resembling a centipede. Growth's ways of understanding life and remixing its blueprint for its creations never fails to amaze. It wields a heavy caliber machine gun, a mini rocket launcher, and a cluster grenade launcher, and it simply will not stop until its core is destroyed. The eyeless face still seems to look around, as if searching for threats to its territory. Growth seems to give its monsters behaviors of other creatures, without any other purpose than mimicry. This is probably the toughest non-boss enemy type in this game, and they require hails upon hails of sustained fire to be brought down. This description also mentions mimicry, and that's probably for good reason. This is not new information. We already know Growth imitates materials for its structures, weapons for their soldiers, and even clothing. That being said, this theme will be especially prevalent in this episode. Moving on, we come across this technological facility. There's several half-translucent torsos on coffin-like tables, and a lorbit. Their bodies aren't fully tangible, and their faces are missing. What were they doing here? They seem to express some form of emotion too. You won't believe this, but we will have to come back to them later, when this will make much more sense. Further along, the rust organs actually give way to the more human environment of a small part of an apartment complex. I'm not really sure whether this is an actual building being consumed by Growth, or if it is an imitation. However, the smooth transitions from the industrial building into the complex and then back into the rust organs make me think it's the latter. There's one Easter egg here, probably a reference to something flying over my head right now. This room is the smooth transition I was speaking of, by the way. It looks like it's just as much part of the rust organs as anything else. We also fight a single ancient one here, and it feels a bit out of place, doesn't it? This will also be a theme in this episode. Everything that created Growth and everything that Growth created is falling apart and blending together into some unknown project of absolute chaos. Stepping through this gate, we finally see a good omen, jets flying overhead, bombing a structure of Growth. Only took them 6 months to arrive, no biggie. The rest of the level takes place in these strange trenches, and 2 more times we see explosions, one of them right on a nest of tough enemies. Another tube of flesh leads us to the exit. The next level is Rustborn Messiah. The wound in me bleeds, and I am beginning to feel pain again, a hollow coldness radiating from my chest all around my body. I am losing my power. As long as my legs continue to carry me and I can still aim, I must keep moving without pause. Someone is stalking me in the haze of this desolate factory. Its movement is weightless, soundless, too perfect. We are in the rust organs again, starting on top of a pile of corpses, some of which being sympaths. It's as if we've traversed a now defunct tract for waste transport. Dropping down into this arena, we are soon faced with the first boss fight of the episode. The battle has us fight against 3 Rustborn Messiah enemies, back to back to back, wielding a quad shotgun, rocket launcher and minigun respectively. When it comes to the first and third, range is your best friend. It is the second one that's the hardest in my opinion. His rocket launcher has great homing, for whatever reason, and deals tremendous damage. The first 2 disappear into a haze of orange energy, further connecting healer to the new empowered variants. The last, however, drops to their knees, pulls out a revolver, and blows their brains out, or whatever it is they've got in there. These foes are replicas of healer, and their description reads: Growth's addled ways of recreating life was effective, yet simple, too simple for its own sake. On the outside, the Rustborn Messiah is a perfect copy of the healer, down to the minute details of his deformed body and ragged and repurposed hazmat suit. As the creature had decided to self-terminate by his own free will, its demise left the healer a terrifying feeling which he could not get out of his mind. Free will. It was as if behind that mask was also a sentience, a person, another him, confused and conflicted. Growth has been able to create proper minds, the throne's firstborn being one example. However, this took a huge amount of time and biomatter. The vast majority of the hellish legions were controlled by some kind of hive mind instead. Now, armed with a treasure trove of data, from the one thing it could not stop, Growth is capable of creating true sentience, these 3 specimen being early but potent attempts. Okay, let's get to Oblivion Treshold. This is the big one. This is the level when I realized the story wasn't going to come together on its own and will require some really deep digging to figure it all out. Growth only seeks to devour, to learn and to grow stronger. It was obvious that it would eventually begin to copy the one thing it cannot kill, but an imitation remains an imitation. Traveling through the ruins, I find another underground fortress of theirs. An eerie bell echoes in the distance, and both the Growth and the Malicant have gathered here. Their wrath for me must not be underestimated. This will not be easy. This level takes place in a gaping cavern of flesh, not unlike the Filth Pit, and has a similar greenish tinge. There's been a few points in this episode so far which looked deliberately reminiscent of areas from previous zones. The rust organs, the apartment complex, the pile of dead sympaths, the green haze inside a hole of growth in this level, the cultist props, and what I can only assume are the remnants of the vivarium pipes. I wouldn't necessarily go as far as saying that they are the same spots, but I think the game is trying to show us that we're vaguely retreading our footsteps towards some core of growth that healer believes to exist somewhere. The first part of this level takes place in the small fortress of Rust, but our goal is the church on top of the cliff. To open the gate, we will have to cut open 2 tumors at the ends of each lane. The left path winds through piles of debris and hordes of Malicant. Ascending the edges of this ravine, we find the entrance to this chunk of their ship that has crash landed here, and a pit of bodies, seemingly a mass grave. The inside of the vessel doesn't seem all that overrun with growth, but it is filled with a lot of angry space demons. A lore bit on the screen of static reads: The brave sentinels have gone to pass through the rift storm. They believe it will lead them to the core of the Malnecris, the growth. One stays behind to keep the rift storm stable, so we may all pass through it. This is very vague, and things will only get worse. Further inside the ship, there's more screens with 3 consecutive lore bits. The growth runs rampant. The powers freed from the throne's destruction are convening, giving birth to something new. We may never witness it. Without our medicine, we are nothing. We never saw our matriarch again. one survivor returned from the throne's realm. With her death, our hopes of survival came to an abrupt end. What she called rebranding was nothing but a mockery. And so her poor child's betrayal, her attempts at godhood, centuries of meaningless servitude, it was all for nothing. The warrior's path surely ends on an equally hollow note. The Malicant don't quite know what happened inside of the throne, but they know of our victory over the matriarch. They say one survivor returned, and that could have been us, but the way these are written almost sounds like they reported what happened to the rest of the flock. So I feel like this was some Malicant, but it's pretty open to interpretation. Now the powers of the throne are nourishing something in the heart of growth. There's a rift storm leading there, held open by one sentinel, and many of the aliens have passed through. The Malicant are now disillusioned with everything they've been doing so far. They will never return to their old ways of life again. They're stranded on Earth, and all there is to do is see what it's all building towards. If they won't have their immortality or throne, at least they will witness the final form of the thing that destroyed their dreams. One part of this text that surprised me is talk of a betrayal by the matriarch's child. I say the because there is only one, the Death-wrought child. This eludes me to this day. What betrayal? The son was rebranded and then cast away. So far, there has been no talk of anything he did of his own agency. My only hypothesis for this is maybe when we find him dead in the throne room, he actually came back to seek the throne for himself. Reaching the tumor, we get a good view of how molten steel is pouring out from underneath the church, which again reminds me a lot of the filth pit. Having made the incision, more troops spawn to attack us, and now we must go down the second lane, this one a dark labyrinth of rotting filth. This is where I actually fired my 0th nuke, and now I had -1. I'm sure there's some deep lore connections there. After cutting the other tumor, we can enter this huge cavity with... Could they make my job easy for once? It's the Death-wrought child, still decapitated, carrying his head, and he sure do be walking. I am afraid to say there is no more context to this, and I somehow have to make sense of it. My best guess as to why he's here is that Growth is intensely experimenting with forms of powerful creatures, and we've seen that already with Healer. We know that the throne has powers of resurrection, as per episode 1, so maybe the child was brought back as another possible blueprint of a champion for the Malnecris. Only one more tumor, one more horde, and the gate opens. Some familiar props and beings, back from the cult levels in episode 1, and we enter the church before the floor crumbles underneath us. Now we are affected by the Sentinel's bell, and our movement speed is greatly reduced, while also disabling our flashlight. A ghostly silhouette approaches us, and momentarily takes physical form to strike at Healer. A single shot from the Jawbreaker is enough for it to keel over and tear off its own face, before emitting a cloud of blood-sapping substances. This enemy is called Dregs. After Healer's heart and source of his strength had been extracted, Growth began to experiment on cloning the one thing it could not outpower. Though the process of cloning is unknown, these few specimens seem to exist mostly in a near-invisible state of gases. It says gases. That's what it says in the gases, yeah. And otherworldly energy. Their forms solidify only momentarily to strike at their victim, turning invisible soon afterwards. Their body holds immense amounts of Growth's bloodletting toxins that seem to thirst only for Healer's blood. Same toxins were seen after the death of its hive mind, as if the flesh had desperately thirsted for life and strength. These creatures we saw being manufactured back in E3M1, and their attempts at recreating Healer. The mention of emotion also probably refers to how growth was successful in forming a sentient and conscious beings with the Rustborn Messiahs. In these catacombs, there's also corpses of Malicants strewn about, Malnekris blooming by the dozen. Besides these, the church really isn't consumed by growth at all. Maybe the bell is effective in keeping it at bay. That being said, this place did belong to the cult, and we find some notes. The throne once healed us. We brought it our sick and the dead, and it would give them life through rebirth. Two things into one, but as its strength waned, death, its ichor, swallowed everyone. This passage talks of how the throne became damaged with misuse over the centuries, and the growth became what it is today. This is information we already knew back from episode 2. Ascending higher up, we reach this gathering room. The book on the lectern reads, "I write this at the risk of my own life. The throne was a prison for the growth, primordial life. It was a slave of the demons from the stars. Throne spoke to me, warning me that the prison of the growth had begun to crumble, blood and flesh of endless worlds within it screaming to get out, and the fools worshipped its firstborn." Again, this information is not new to us, but what is new to us is there was at least one cultist who wasn't blinded by faith and saw things for what they were. I was wondering why the game repeats so many things between the bestiary and the in-game lore bits and loading screen preludes. Much like how the bestiary unlocks only after beating the game, I suspect it might have been made later than the episodes themselves, too. I don't know if this is true or not, but it makes a lot more sense as to why the story is being told the way it is, if we assume the campaign was meant to be self-sufficient. The room at the top houses the Rift Storm we heard of before, and the Sentinel keeping it open. There's a white scar in the barrier, much like the one that let us into the throne back in E2M5, and much like that one, cutting it destabilizes the rift, breaking everything apart and sucking us into the familiar wormhole effect, and the level ends. So, this one is a doozy, but let's try to briefly analyze what is happening, as I believe later levels will shed further light. The level is called Oblivion Treshold, meaning it exists on the edge of some grand chasm. The church belonged to the cult, but now it is a home for a rift that leads to another place. That place is now where growth is gathering all of its power and matter, and I don't think it is a coincidence that we have to travel through a wormhole to reach it. It's not just a portal in space and time. I believe the upcoming location is walling itself off from the rest of the universe. The final non-boss level of this episode is the titular Death Storm Havoc, and Havoc there will be. The storm I released from the grafting throne is causing anomalies in the atmosphere. The city is rapidly crumbling around me to make way for more of its twisted constructs. Whatever requires this much power must be the growth's final ace in stopping me. More of my humanity is slowly returning to me. I've begun to feel the weight of my body, and my breathing is becoming shallower. There is no telling how far I can keep going anymore. This might just be the most consistently deep red level in the game. Even though my recording software is set to the highest quality settings, there still creeps in some noticeable compression. Most of it takes place in these abstract vestiges of the city ruins, or the Rustborn constructs, everything hanging above some grand chasm. Even more so, there's several points where flashes of orange energy temporarily change the skybox to a vision of the throne's other world. In general, this area appears to be where the growth's powers are at their strongest. In the distance is probably the biggest skeleton in the game, along with other towering constructs, sparkling with yellow or orange energy. Indeed, as the level transition implies, Malnekris is pooling all of its resources together and funneling them towards some final project. Besides what I've brought up, this level is primarily a test of combat mettle and endurance. Twice we must ascend these spires while fending off immeasurable hordes of filth, and we even get to stack 2 Carnage amplifiers at once. Much like in Dusk, the effect of these power-ups compounds, while the game goes to great lengths to tell us Healer has lost strength and is now barely holding on. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling more powerful than ever. We find ourselves facing a mountain of rot and decay, and a choice of 2 teleporters. This is my final obstacle. I should use everything I have, save none of my ammo, especially the warheads. This isn't actually the final obstacle, but each of the teleporters takes us to a different, yet both the most challenging and intense arenas of the game. This is where Incision really became one of my all-time greats. This is exactly the kind of exasperating and unrelenting challenge I play throwback shooters for. When we're done with the first one, we get the message. The bloodshed stirs the great vault of flesh. A portal has opened. This portal takes us back to the 2 gates, and completing the other tells us the mountain of death and rot stirs from the bloodshed. A portal has opened above. Now, realistically, these messages are just in-character context clues on what we should be doing. However, my job here is to be obnoxiously anal, so from a lore perspective, these imply the point of spilling all this blood in the arenas was to feed this somewhat sentient being of death and disease. Hey guys, just wanted to interject something quickly here. As I was no-clipping around, grabbing footage for the video, I realized that these constructs I mentioned earlier are actually the arenas the 2 big arenas that you fight in near the end of the level. I also noticed how, if you look at the mountain of rot, there is these pulses of energy going up it. I mean, it doesn't tell us anything new. I just thought I felt like it solidifies this connection that this bloodshed that we're spilling in these arenas is actually, powering the creature and what's inside. Now a 3rd gate is available in the center, which lets us towards the awful construct. With another glimpse of the other world, we get to enter inside. A pit full of monsters and explosive barrels seems to be the final blood sacrifice we must perform before dropping down into the original rust organs. Now seeming completely defunct and devoid of any activity, the lights are off and walls of flesh and viscera prohibit us from accessing the rest of the level. The only way to go is back towards the original entrance. Growth has completely changed its objective since that fateful day. This used to be an instrument used to conquer the planet, but now Growth is unable to stop even one man. The final level of Incision is the Alchemical Miracle. I was never their prisoner. They were studying me all this time. I was being tested, pushed to my limit so the Growth could improve upon my blueprint. Thousands of its creations sacrificed so they could see what I was capable of and where they could do better, but they didn't expect me to survive this far. The destruction of the throne brought down the Malikant's purified medicine and combined it with putrefied flesh of the Growth. With the heart I was gifted, the source of my strength, the end product of this unification can be nothing less than the Growth's magnum opus. In case you don't know, magnum opus, according to Cambridge Dictionary, is the most important piece of work done by a writer or artist. We have to walk through the ending portion of the level, eerily empty of activity, but filled with weapons and ammo. On my first playthrough, I felt like this moment of returning back to a decrepit version of an old level wasn't really earned, and it kind of felt like the game was just playing the cheap trope that it's seen in Dusk. But now, having paid more attention to the environmental storytelling, it makes a bit more sense, and feels slightly more foreshadowed. A lot of the locations and sites we see in this episode seem deliberately reminiscent of past moments. And realistically, we have seen this mountain of rot before, just not from the perspective of healer. This thing is the flesh cocoon that we started the game in, and I should have seen this coming. But, like I said, I am an especially dense motherfucker. When coming up on the bridge that led us out of here, it cuts off, and this is the sight we're greeted with. The house in the background that we started the game in, a gaping pit in the ground, and one final trick, Upgrowth's sleeve. Leaping down, the mound of flesh starts lethargically moving, but most of the threat comes from two giant ethereal eyes, situated on the same spires we saw all the way back then. Once the eyes are gone, the central creature explodes into a vortex of energy, and another giant eye reforms. The health bar for the Alchemical Miracle appears, and its true form is revealed. This creature is clearly reminiscent of Healer. The mask on its face, the blade on its arm, the things growing out of its back to me feel deliberately similar to depictions of the throne. The yellow mesh on parts of its body signifies the creature is not fully developed yet, and the yellow glow in its chest probably represents all the energy poured into it. The name Alchemical Miracle appeared all the way back in the very first level, on the whiteboard. This really is the final stage of Growth's attempts at creating a perfect killing machine, and is an improvement on Healer's design. The bestiary description reads: "It had become clear that the Healer was not simply a prisoner of the Growth. In truth, the prison of flesh he spent 6 months preparing in was nothing but a starting point for a journey Growth had built for him. He was perfect, one of a kind, radiating a kind of power which Growth could not reach, so it settled with observing him, waiting for him to show its potential. It could not fight its one imprinted mission, which was to protect the grafting throne, but a loophole did exist. Healer was allowed to kill all of its creations, lay waste to its structures, and tear his way to the grafting throne. Every gunshot, slice, dodge, jump, and reload of a weapon was a step furthering the Growth's magnum opus, which was missing one last component, the grafting throne's power. Indeed, eventually the grafting throne was shattered, and the sky rained with purified growth, invigorating its project even further than expected. A miracle from the sky gave birth to the one fated god which the cult had spoken of, one who would harness worlds between worlds, energy to shape life anew, and power to shattered worlds. After all, Growth only wished for one thing, the most primal objective, shared by all of its flesh, to grow and get stronger. The Growth was always killed off and harvested before it could reach the stage by the Malicant. But now, with them gone, this being is not only a potent champion, but also a combination of all the powers playing part in this story, making it an effective god. Shooting the eye in the sky, or should I say, hole in the sky, doesn't deal damage to the health bar, but it will eventually break and harm the boss substantially. The entire fight is a visual clusterfuck of explosions and beams of energy. They can even pluck fighter jets from the sky and throw them at us. Killing the boss results in getting enveloped in a white light before the cutscene plays. The core of Healer has been modified or entirely recreated to be of a size suitable for the Alchemical Miracle. They push the spear saw inside, and the explosion throws them onto the ground. The sky turns from a red vortex to black, and the blood rain turns into water, washing everything away, as the white light flickers from our eyes. The block from the very start is still here, and Healer hobbles over, a dying sycophant, against the wall has their head obliterated, as the protagonist drops onto a chair, and Kitty climbs onto his lap. Exhausted beyond belief, he passes out, and we see Healer's true eye for the first time since the opening cutscene. The credits play, but this is not the end. There is one more cutscene to go through. Healer again, still in his bloodied hazmat suit, puts on Inni on the gramophone, and we look through some newspapers. One headline reads, "City devastated in mass bombing. Countless dead for no clear reason. Furious relatives now demand answers. Lone survivor seen leaving the site of catastrophe. Law enforcement searching, hoping to find some answers." With a picture of some people with no discernible details. Terrorist group celebrates claiming glory for the alleged bioweapon attack. The Red Rock Devil, real or hoax? As the dust settles, rumors of odd sightings are inbound. Disgusting use of a recent tragedy to make up hoaxes and conspiracy theories. The camera shows us the inside of a house, with the same chair and lamp we know from earlier, and a doghouse with Kitty written on it. Healer walks up to some potted plants, one of them clearly being a remnant of growth. The glow in his eye is back, and he still looks exactly the same as before. Looking out the window, he sees some military-looking trucks driving by, and the camera shows us the sign taped onto the front door of this house. Inspection notice condemned. This establishment has been deemed unsafe and its occupancy has been prohibited by the city building inspector. It then pans away to Red Rock Trailer Park and cuts off to the end. That's a lot to go over, but we now have every piece of information. As for the story of Incision, I will soon go back and dissect these final levels, but I want to make a short interjection. These details and events are some of the most cryptic, and to me they toe the line of falling into all-out abstraction. There is just very little to go off of to create a coherent storyline, and therefore a lot of what I will be saying will be essentially speculation. I want to reiterate what I said in the previous video. I do not have some secret arcane knowledge about this game that is inaccessible to mere mortals. The goal of these videos is to show you everything relevant or interesting about the story of this game, and then present my overanalyzed interpretation of it all. Ideally, I would want them to be sparks for further discussion and analysis, because at the end of the day, I'm just an idiot who got their hands on an editing software. With that in mind, I've been thinking a lot about how I will summarize these last 3 levels. Oblivion Treshold especially has been sitting in my head for months. So let's go over what I think is happening. When the throne was destroyed, its power rained down along with all the growth and medicine from the wreckage from the Malekith ship. This energy was forming the other world within, but it didn't just go away. It was now pooling along with the growth, which in turn was preparing its final project. I believe all this concentration of resources warped the space around it so hard that the location of the flesh cocoon is starting to become a second otherworld in of itself, as hinted by the glimpses we get into the former pocket dimension inside the throne. All of it is meant to be concentrated inside of the Alchemical Miracle. The true throne used to be a sort of machine and interface between a mortal god and Malnekris, but now this final form of growth's champion will take its place. This is the true god that the cult believed to arrive one day. They were onto something after all. It's just that up until now, growth was never allowed to reach this stage of development. This is why it makes sense the knowledge or means to access this new otherworld was found in the cultic ruins by the Malekith, and it's where the portal is being kept open. It's also why the same mechanism transports us as it did when we entered the throne. It also makes sense why the flesh cocoon is at the center of it all, as it's a place of metamorphosis and gestation. At the start we thought it would have been that of the player, but now it's clear it was intended for something else. The spires projecting the eyes in the boss fight were always there. The space demons have lost their purpose after the destruction of the matriarch and the throne, and now wish to travel to the new nexus of activity. I realized that despite expressing their desires to go through the rift, this Sentinel is the final Malekith we see in the game, outside of this Easter egg in the final level. Therefore, I believe they were all taken, or came here specifically to give themselves to the growth. They still fight us, if only to protect their new purpose, as we're working to destroy it. The Alchemical Miracle is an imitation of Healer, but perfected and using his stolen power. When it dies, the protagonist destroys his former core and the concentration of all the forces at play here. The transition to an environment without growth is pretty jarring, and I struggle to exactly make sense of the effects. Clearly, this doesn't kill off all growth, as Kitty is still with us, and so is Healer. I think the biomatter of growth is still there, but now it's just meat, without any guidance, purpose or sinister edge, and probably quite helpless. Episode 3 is the point where the military finally decided to do something about the problem since the initial outbreak, and is conducting bombing runs with jets. While this demolishes some of Growth's constructs, it's not going to be effective against the real threat, as the final boss can literally pluck them out of the sky. In this final cutscene, the military trucks driving past could represent them going to safely dispose of the remaining Growth, or maybe it's a cliffhanger. The newspapers we get glimpses of show us that the general public has no idea what really happened in Red Rock, and that makes sense if Growth was consuming everything and everyone. The only ones who really would have known the truth would have been Healer and maybe the military, along with maybe some other potential survivors. And why would the military want to disclose any of it? Realistically, they probably don't know the cause of the tragedy, and it might well have been the result of some awful bioweapon used by terrorists. Healer is still alive and living in seeming peace. I'm not sure why he hasn't changed his clothes, or at least washed the blood off of him. I wonder if the hazmat suit is now part of his body. The glow in his eyes is back too, which seems strange. As the remnants of his strength waned, the flickering light finally disappeared, representing a full return to humanity in spirit, even if his vessel was still transformed. Remember, the white glow represents the throne's power given to him. Characters in media are sometimes represented with their characteristic features, even if it doesn't make sense for them to have these features right now, just for the purpose of recognizability by the audience. In the intro to Elden Ring, for example, the Dung Eater is shown getting hung in his armor, even though it makes no sense for them to be hanging him with the noose around it. Therefore, it makes sense the only reason he's drawn this way is for the audience to recognize him later. Maybe something similar is happening here. I'll be honest, this single sign on the front door is giving me nightmares, because it complicates what seemed like a simple ending. Healer is now safe, leading a simple life as an owner of a trailer park, letting someone better equipped finish the job of eliminating Growth. But then, why is his house condemned? I've been thinking about this for weeks, ever since starting this series, and I think the best hypothesis I've got is what came to me today as I'm writing this script. I promise this will be my final crackpot theory, so bear with me. I think Healer is hiding from the military. He wasn't evacuated, he wasn't discovered by anyone, he came to this house in the trailer park, which was evacuated as the cataclysm was unfolding, and made it his shelter to live under the radar for as long as he could. Given his unusual appearance, there is a decent chance the military would not treat him as a victim and civilian, but as just another Growth monster, albeit particularly intelligent. Kitty would probably also have been killed or dissected for scientific purposes. They definitely wouldn't be letting him keep this Growth plant, so at the very least, it's pretty clear his existence in this location is not sanctioned. Oh my god, I just realized something as I'm recording this this audio. You know how the Sentinel in the first at the end of the first episode he rings the bell and it causes Healer to drop down on his knees. This isn't relevant to what I was talking about, by the way. But then I'm thinking, okay, well, in episode 2, the Sentinels we fight, they don't really have this effect. Like, they do kind of slow us down when we get hit by the magic, but that's basically it. And then in episode 3, there is this church, and simply being in this church with the Sentinel that's bellowing this bell, it slows you down, it forces you to disable your flashlight. What if this is the same Sentinel? What if this one Sentinel is special for whatever reason, and it's the same one, because it's the only 2 times that the bell has this effect on us. That wasn't supposed to be my final crackpot theory. This is another one. This one might be the most crackpot of all crackpot theories. Yeah, I might cut that. I don't know if that's going in the video. I think the final mystery to solve is, why is Healer called Healer? Unfortunately, there's essentially no clues given on this. You see, we don't really heal anything or anyone. Instead, we, well, nuke shit to oblivion. The closest we come to healing something is bringing down the medicine onto the growth in the city. Maybe this word is more metaphorical, in that we heal the world of growth, but that's not very satisfying. Let's consider for a moment the context of the word. In the game, healer is only ever used by the pilot, and no other source. If we ignore things like the bestiary descriptions, this title is just something pilot decided to call the protagonist, for whatever reason. The bestiary does call them healer both as the name of the character and also refers to them as such in other descriptions. However, I feel like if this was indeed written after the episodes were created, this should be treated as a secondary source to the game itself. So we would have to consider what exactly does the pilot think we should be healing. Did he think we would heal the grafting throne back to its original state? This is contradicted by his description, saying he wanted us to destroy it. At times, the pilot says my healer, which he could interpret as either healer that was created by me or healer of me. This is before he got sliced in half by the matriarch, and maybe at this point in time, he wasn't intending on dying by our hands? So, what if he did think we would heal him of something? I feel like this is as close as I can get to answering this question, and I'm pretty happy to hand it over to you guys. This is the one thing that always felt to me like it was never going to have an answer, but maybe you know something I don't. Alright, I think that's about all the mysteries that needed explaining in the game, so we will shortly get to the recap. I promised that we'd get back to the cutting of faces, and I did write 2 massive paragraphs of this utterly unhinged theory about how growth is disassembling and reassembling healer between areas it controls, but looking at it now, it seems incredibly dumb, and I don't want to be putting dumb ideas in your head. Honestly, that theory was just a result of me trying to understand why some levels end with a face and others not. It feels deliberate, doesn't it? In episode 1, there's only one level transition that doesn't end with a face, and it's the last one. In episode 2, the first one takes place in the Vivarium, and the second one is after transitory termination, on the Malekith ship. I still think there is some reason behind this, but it's probably quite mundane, simple, and not particularly important. So, what do you think? Maybe you have some explanation I haven't thought of. Anyway, my list of things to get back to has now been completely emptied, which feels extremely satisfying. Therefore, let's finally get to the complete recap of the entire Incision timeline and story. The timeline starts untold centuries, millennia, or even longer than that ago. A race of beings we only know under the title of Ancient Ones were in possession of the grafting throne. Whether it predates them or not is unclear, and its origin is also unknown. The grafting throne was a tool of great power and influence. Within it resided an ocean of malnecris, a soup of primordial life, which could be used in deliberate and calculated ways to manipulate life through rapid evolution or its decomposition back into basic materials. This growth, at its most extreme, was capable of consuming and repurposing biomatter while creating constructs of meat for further expansion. But that's not how it used to go. The grafting throne houses an other world, a pocket dimension, within itself as a result of its energy and power. In order to enter, rebranding must be undergone by a living creature. This process can be performed artificially through massive exposure to growth or by use of the throne itself. It causes the being to undergo a lot of physical transformations, including growing a special bone blade. This blade is a key to cut open a rift in space and allows the owner to enter the other world. Inside, the true throne awaits, and the controls within for it, allowing them to perform the previously listed actions. These creatures are referred to as mortal gods because they will all fall to time. Within the throne, they will be buried, and new ones will come to take their place. We meet the animated corpses of the ancient ones, and their number might be very high. However, each new creation of the throne is more powerful than the last. They created a race of beings called the Malicant, and the first of them was rebranded to be the new pilot, while the rest took the place of their creators, whether that be by conquest or thanks to wielding the power of the throne. Their signature feature are their 3 eyes. In this game, if something has 3 eyes, it's either Malicant or meant to look like them. The Malicant built a society of order and obedience under the matriarch. She rose to power by telling them death was a shortcoming, which could be cured, and hatching a plan to harvest immeasurable amounts of growth. She somehow shackled the pilot to be sent down with the throne onto planets harboring life, and then for Malnekris to consume all the biomatter to become one. It's difficult to say exactly how this process looked like back then, but we will get to see what it's like on Earth. Once the growth died, it would liquefy and be fit for harvest. It was an essential component to producing life-prolonging medicine for the Malicant as a whole, so they could be kept alive for another world to be killed off. At least, that's what the matriarch told them. She discovered rebranding could be performed artificially, using huge amounts of their medicine. Her real goal was to undergo this process, kill the pilot, and become the next mortal god. Most of the glorious substance was funneled directly to her and the Cherished, Malicant modified to resemble her and enhance their combat skills. And so this race built harvest vessels to send into deep space to feed their cruel cycle. They became the masters of growth and used its near magical abilities of imitation to construct their very ships, and probably most of their structures in general, becoming entirely dependent on it and their leader. Her son was the first to be rebranded, to see if the facilities and technology would work. The process was successful. He transformed into an aquatic, fish-like creature, while keeping his appendages and growing the bone blade necessary to access the throne. This sparked great jealousy within the matriarch, and she cast him into the sewer underbelly of the ship, never to be seen again. One day, the Malicant discovered Earth and life on it. In the 1700s at the very latest, but probably earlier, they planted the throne in anticipation of the coming harvest. It was delivered to a group of people who believed the giant creature to be a chariot of the gods and a true divinity. They became a religious sect as they witnessed the throne perform miracles of curing the old and sick, or even resurrecting them at a cost. A terrible new form, a result of making two things into one, they saw as divine and purified instead. The most loyal and holy of members were laid in the closest proximity of the throne and became its stationary guardians. As time went on, a crack formed within the vessel, a result of age-old misuse, from which growth seeped. This was actually what allowed the pilot to start acting out his plan of ending the cycle of death and exploitation. This growth acted more like the all-consuming and assimilating force we witness in the game. It started creating a firstborn, combined of all the sacrifices brought forth by the now death cult. Once upon a time, people gathered to be cured, purified or resurrected, but now the only purpose of the cult was to feed sacrifices to this firstborn, willing or unwilling. The purpose of this creature was to grow, get stronger, and protect the throne so that the Malicant would not come back for it. The pilot needed another being to rebrand, which could destroy the throne and everything it stood for, and the space demons would not allow for that. The cult developed, with arrivals from all around the world, usually desperately following rumors of a divine cure to whatever ailment they held. They believed the firstborn to be a near god that would eventually consume all of Earth if it could grow big and strong enough. Over the centuries, they took many forms, but with the throne unexpectedly falling dormant, the sands of time eventually buried the holy site, chariot, and firstborn. The game starts with Episode 1, Death Cult Vestiges. In modern times, archaeologists uncover the old cult grounds, one of which being the player character. Their expedition led them all the way down to the throne, and the new presence woke up the machine. It commands a sea of Malnekris to rise trapping the player character before taking hold of them and stabbing their face with a tentacle. The protagonist is referred to as Healer in the bestiary and other sources. Note that the pilot is in control of the throne during all of this. It is he who chose Healer as the ideal specimen to be rebranded, and rebranded they become. They undergo a transformation, grow a new face from a metallic mesh with a mask and glowing white eyes. This glow is a direct result of the throne's powers interacting with his body. A bone blade sprouts from their forearm before falling off, though it remains an important object of mystery and obsession for Healer. In this moment of rebranding, a singular goal was given to him by the pilot: come back to kill me and the throne. However, this could not be done there and then, as to destroy the entire machine, Healer would have to be relocated to a safe place, as growth invaded and took over the city of Red Rock, underneath which it resided. Healer was imprisoned, or so he thought, within an apartment block suspended in a cocoon of flesh. Across 6 months, growth slowly infected and invaded the city. Slowly enough that a martial law could have been imposed, and for people to be in the dark as to what is happening around them. It used hideous creations of flesh and fake steel as its foot soldiers, almost all of which were under the control of a hive mind, the Firstborn. Healer used this time to study the ever-present threat and his own new body. He discovered growth is a substance capable of incredible imitation and adaptability. It's able to erect entire buildings and other constructs from one singular material, despite all looking and feeling different from each other. He's captured and killed several different types of monsters, each of them reusing templates the threat has absorbed from humans or other living creatures in the past. However, growth largely operates independently of the throne and has different interests. The pilot in control is a sentient being, but the filth is just amorphous and invasive life that only wants to learn, improve, consume, and grow stronger. Growth was actually observing Healer all this time because he was the strongest thing it's seen. All the obstacles it throws our way in the game are experiments on how to build something even more deadly and potent. The cocoon is already intended to be a place for gestation for what will come after him, but Healer doesn't know that yet. One day, a strike team arrives at his doorstep, which beckons him to start the journey back whence it all came and fulfill his purpose. The opposition includes Rustborn. Growth created imitations of the soldiers that used to fight it, and sycophants, non-turned humans that went mad from the horrible events and started worshipping growth as their god and bringing it more victims. More horrors of flesh and steel will follow shortly. This first level, Hole in the Sky, takes place inside of this cocoon. To leave the fake prison, we must cut this disgusting pale fleshy tumor. These constructs hold the mind of a human and essentially control some Rustborn systems. The level transition takes us to the Rust Organs, which is a key part in Growth's conquest of Earth. This facility burns up and processes biomatter, and the toxic fumes it emits contain an airborne agent, which allows the filth to build constructs using material from the atmosphere. The Malicant actually have their equivalent version in their ship, which immolates the bodies of their own dead and augments their production capabilities of the medicine. All of it for their mother god, of course. They believe they will one day harness the power of the throne for themselves and be able to resurrect all their fallen comrades, but that's a lie. Their comrades are processed filth. Inside of the main furnace, we fight a boss called Feral Armament, the description of which seems to suggest it's got a mind of its own, independent of the hive mind. In Blood Totems, we leave the Rust Organs and enter the infested city. Most of it has already been taken over by the Factory of Horrors, but some old buildings remain. A spire of flesh and bone has been erected by Growth, potentially for purposes of psychological warfare. That being said, the fleshy menace does sometimes just imitate things for the sake of imitation. Inside a hollowed out cave, drenched in malnecris, Healer finds and adopts a creature he calls Kitty. As a pet and weapon, it's a small, fish-like organism with a will of its own. It's been resting on a bigger, dead specimen. The description of the Deathroot child, the matriarch's offspring, draws attention to the similarity between these two beings, and this is probably a template absorbed by growth in the past on another world. To make our way down, we must demolish a building and find a narrow hole. The filth pit and subsequent levels take place underground, and this one's in a large space, hollowed out by and lined with the ever-present Malnecris. I believe this facility to be a spawning grounds, which also acts as a blockade for outsiders trying to fight their way in, such as us. Nervend is the next map, and it takes place just before the entrance to the old cult grounds. Part of it is a burial site for people who weren't let in, now being consumed, and part is another industrial-looking facility of growth, along with sewers of blood. There is a neural network here that we need to disrupt before a huge lift takes us further down. The titular death cult vestiges are up next, and this level has several layers, so to speak. Some of it feels like an unholy cathedral and is quite ornate. Part of it takes place in decrepit catacombs, and after fighting another feral armament, we drop down the Well of Sacrifices to another, even older and very primitive burial site. The chief threat in this lair will be basic sculptures of the Malekith, animated by growth. A giant gate is the final obstacle before the boss fight, capping off this episode. The throne's firstborn and its guardians protect the otherworldly being, but Healer was designed to cut through all opposition. Having slain the monster, he prepares to destroy the throne as well, but an unexpected problem appears. A squad of Malekith have arrived, and the bellow of the bell incapacitates the protagonist, while the aliens transport a chunk of the city, along with the throne, up to their harvest vessel, and that's where episode 1 ends. Episode 2, Death Filth Medicine, starts underground in the crumbling Harvest Vivarium. This is the part of Red Rock that's been latched onto by the Malekith for harvest of the decaying growth. The death of the firstborn sent a shockwave across the ecosystem and is what liquefies the substance, along with emitting toxins that thirst for Healer's blood, looking to nourish a new central sentience. In this level, we hear a recording of a radio broadcast, which is our only glimpse into the events that happened during the 6 months of Healer's entrapment, the slow descent into chaos and how the humans could not possibly comprehend or prepare for what was happening. Parasitic Relations is the next level, a heavily corrupted and infested shopping center overflowing with seeping filth. This is where the intake for one of the pressure pipes that collects the produce is located, and we hitch a ride up to the vessel itself. The level called Death Filth Medicine starts with us getting dropped into a cell and coming face to face with the Malekith. The attempt to drown us in growth, but some quick thinking results in us dropping down the waste tube before receiving a telepathic message from the pilot. He will be subtly guiding us through the levels taking place on the ship in order to destroy the throne and the matriarch. That being said, the goal of this level is the sabotage of the medicine production facility. The ship itself is made of growth, and we see it breaking out from underneath the control of the aliens, and even literally breaking through their bodies, while also spawning its hideous changelings. This is due to something called a dead old mind, and I'm not confident on where to place this in the timeline. It could have been the death of the firstborn, but instead I believe this happened a while ago, and we never find out what this old mind is. In the next level, we meet and fight the Deathroot child in the depths of the growth transport tracts. They aren't killed, but merely flee, and let us pass through on ahead. Transitory Termination is the next level, and it takes place in the Malekith's own Rust Organ style facility. At the end, we find the matriarch's rebranding pod, and she grows a blade as we watch, lashing out in fury. The systems detect damage and drag her away. She's now ready and on her way to enter the throne, so we must stop her. The Ruptured Idol takes us through more utilitarian and brutalist environments, until it doesn't. Here we get a glimpse into what the life of the Malekith workers' lives looks like, with communal spaces for eating and relaxation. We also see the Deathroot child might have come back to seek the throne for itself, or maybe he also wanted to stop the matriarch, but now lies decapitated in her throne room. we view her opening a rift in space before entering the realm of the Grafted Throne. Grafted Throne? Seriously? It's Grafting Throne, you fucking moron. Before entering the realm of the Grafting Throne, with us following closely behind. Despite this, we still have to make it through an entire unnamed level of the Otherworld, a shattered ashen scape of various temples, burial sites, and other structures, all hanging above a red surface of primordial life. We recognize the origin of familiar templates presently in the hellscape on Earth, such as the spires or the tombs hanging from the side of the walls. Taking one more portal, we finally meet with a dying pilot, cut in half by the matriarch. He explains it was his idea and goal to rebrand the protagonist in order for them to return and destroy the throne, the pilot and the matriarch, and along with them, this whole cursed cycle. He asks for death, and we can choose to kill him or not, but it doesn't matter because he's going to be destroyed along with the throne soon anyway. The matriarch is already taking control over the controls. Did I fucking what is this bullshit? Taking control over the controls, my fucking god, I'm such a fucking... The matriarch is already taking control over the machine, but not for long. In a fierce battle, Healer emerges victorious and destroys it all. All the screaming, writhing Malnekris spills out of the broken throne, before destroying the harvest vessel and bringing down the medicine, otherworldly powers and flesh down onto Red Rock. The final episode, Deathstorm Havoc, has a lot of changes up its sleeve. A lot of the antagonists, save for growth itself, are gone, but their powers are not. It's all pooling and blending together into a disgusting sludge of abominable energy. Healer has been captured by the monsters, and they ripped out a red organ out of his body, the seat of his own strength, given by the throne. They immediately get to analyzing all of the data they've received and throw him into an incinerator. Remember, the protagonist is not some mortal enemy of the all-devouring flesh, it is essentially a testing tool. Even back in E1M2, we've seen how it's analyzing Healer's actions. The goal of the tests? To create a right and proper god and champion, using our form, power and the energy of the throne. Now they've got everything, they just need time, and the tool has just outlived its usefulness. Breaking out of the machine, as we always do, the Cherished Flesh takes place in another Rust Organs type of facility. In one of the sections, we already find early attempts at recreating Healer's form. The functional specimens will come later. As if by imitation, part of the construct is very reminiscent of the apartment building from the start of the game. Once we've broken out, we see what's been trembling and shaking the earth. Jets are flying around, dropping bombs on the contaminated city after 6 months. We see the city is no better off. The Malnekris is aggressively transforming the very air around it, and even my own footage. The first boss of this episode is a trio of Rustborn Messiahs, independent imitations of Healer, sentient too, and the final one chooses to self-terminate, given their psyches must have been extremely fractured. Past them is Oblivion Treshold, a staging point for the Malicants to travel through a rift in space. They aren't all dead. Part of their ship has crash-landed here, and they are dejected, forsaken. Centuries of their persistence and work, all for nothing. Growth is winning, and they might as well see where this all leads towards, giving their bodies to whatever process is happening. A single sentinel keeps open a portal to the heart of growth's activity, a place of such immeasurable energy where the throne's power is forming a new otherworld from a chunk of red rock. The titular Deathstorm Havoc is the final trial where bloodshed of such intense magnitude must take place that a mountain of rot opens a way for us inside. As it turns out, this disgusting construct is the cocoon we started the game in, and the now obsolete and defunct rust organs let us through to the final boss. The real object gestating inside, the Alchemical Miracle, is the result of everything Growth has learned from observing Healer and the wielder of his throne-born strength, as well as the energy of the throne itself. This is what the cult was expecting to arrive, a unitary being to consolidate it all. Inside, a replica of the red organ sits. When destroyed, now it's growth that loses its purpose and resources, starting the slow process of the city turning back to normal. Growth withers and is washed away, and Healer's humanity finally takes its place instead. The epilogue shows the protagonist finding shelter in an empty trailer park, hiding from authorities. And that's it. Incision's lore explained and analyzed to a petty degree. I am so tired right now. I don't even know how to finish off this video. I think one thing I haven't emphasized enough is that some of these plot points are basically just speculation on my part. Oblivion Treshold, for example, has so many strange implications that are very difficult to make heads or tails of on a first playthrough. My theory that growth and Dethrone's powers have concentrated to such a critical density that they're forming a new otherworld, and the level is a gateway to that, is based on a few context clues, and that's it. But you see what I'm working with. These context clues are all I've got. That's just how episode 3 is. Similarly, I feel like I'm missing something with the ending cutscene because this one fucking sign in the end is all it takes to complicate a seemingly simple happy ending. Healer survived and is living a peaceful life as the owner of a trailer park, right? Well, why is his house condemned then? It has to mean something else is going on here. But again, I'm hoping these videos to be a jumping off point for you guys. I'm showing everything there is to show in this game, trying to interpret it one way or another, and then have discussions with you on what the consensus should be. I also feel like the videos don't really do justice as to how convoluted this whole story really is. Remember that on your first playthrough, you will not have the bestiary unlocked, possibly the single clearest and most objective source of information in the game. Almost all of this is still communicated within lore bits and loading screen messages, but those are a lot more cryptic and harder to interpret. And then you get this massive load of info dumped on top of you at once, as soon as you've beaten the game. Everything, no matter the source, is also explained in a non-linear order. As such, it took me more than 2 playthroughs and reading through the entire bestiary several more times before I felt confident enough to start making these videos, and I was still expecting having to figure a lot of things out as I was going along. Following the story might seem kind of trivial if you haven't played the game, but my experience has been anything but. For example, on my first playthrough, I had no idea that the alternate dimension we enter in E2M6 is an otherworld inside of the throne. Remember, by then, the only hint of this pocket dimension you're going to have is this lore bit from the pilot, talking of being a dweller of the throne. I thought, if anything, this was the homeworld of the Malicant, and without this knowledge, things kind of start falling apart. Without the other world, rebranding, key wielding, piloting, all stop making sense. No longer is it understandable what the matriarch even wants, and no longer do we know why the throne fucking dies at the end of the episode. Some of it was me just being a dense motherfucker. Until this playthrough, I did not realize that the corpse inside of the matriarch's throne room was the Deathroot child. It reminded me a lot more of the pilot for some reason, until I took a really close look at it this time. So I made these videos as straightforward as I could, so that other dense motherfuckers could also follow. I think there is a few reasons why this game made a big impression on me with regards to the lore. One of them is that, despite reusing a lot of ideas, there's still a lot of fresh concepts to this lore. Normally in cosmic horror, the source of the evil would come from an otherworld, but in this game it is the throne that has an otherworld inside of itself instead. I also like how the corporeal threat in the form of the growth is somewhat detached from its source, and similarly, the faction controlling the throne is just another third party. Despite it all coming right back to growth, there's so many different independent agents acting with their own interests in mind, which often conflict with each other. The protagonist, the matriarch, the pilot, growth and its spawn, the Deathroot Child, and, in the past, the Cult and the Ancient Ones. I was very impressed at how this game handled non-linear and fragmented storytelling too. Many game devs these days have seen the success of this Dark Souls style storytelling and thought to themselves, wait, I can just write a bunch of word salad, cut it up into pieces, attach it to random objects and NPCs, and that's considered deep storytelling even if none of it makes any sense? Despite loving Dark Souls and its story, I find most of these executions fall completely flat on their faces, precisely because it's often just word salad that isn't actually explaining anything that happens in the game, nor giving any wider context, and I think even FromSoft themselves fell into this trap with their newest releases. These statements are meaningless because they're never corroborated or challenged by anything the player sees for themselves. When I was playing through Incision for the first time, I was very confused as to what was happening and why, but due to the game's limited scope and the repeating concepts, names and themes, it felt like there really was something to piece together here. As I was replaying the game and rereading the bestiary, the pieces did start falling together. The overall volume of story content is nowhere near anything like Dark Souls, but that's what allowed one guy such as myself to cover basically everything in just 3 videos, and I'm still really proud of what I've put together here. I think that's about everything I've had to say for now, but before I go, I wanted to share one last cool detail in this game. While editing, I accidentally discovered that many of the sounds you hear during level transition screens are actually severely slowed down fragments from a music track playing in the upcoming level. Thanks for watching. Hey guys, just wanted to quickly mention another detail I found. If you're using the level select feature to play individual levels, you're going to be starting with no weapons, you're just gonna have the starting revolver and spear saw. And this is like a pistol start in Doom, right? Like the weapons are found in the level. Now this actually includes Kitty. The only times that you actually pick up Kitty is E1M3, E2M1 and the E3M1. These are the only levels where Kitty is a pickup in the level. But if you use the level select feature, it has to give you Kitty, so Kitty is placed somewhere in the level as well. I found that when you pick her up in these levels, it gives you different messages, like the first time you pick her up it's like I shall call her Kitty, I think. But if you pick her up in the other levels, the messages are different, and as far as I can tell, they are specific to these levels. I don't think they're entirely unique. It seems like they repeat a bit, like some of these messages are like, let's get you something to eat, Kitty, or it's dangerous in here, Kitty, you know? But there is a special message that I accidentally found when I was, I loaded into the final level to get some more footage, and when you pick up Kitty, the message is, let's go home, Kitty. Which is just so insanely sad to think about. I don't know about you, that just makes me sad. Yeah, it's just a small little detail I wanted to share. Hey guys, I hope you liked the video. If you do, I would really appreciate if you hit like and subscribe. I want to get monetized, which would help me spend more time and effort making these videos. So if you want to see that, you know what to do. Thank you, bye bye.